Hi, my name is Cora Appelbe and you're welcome to Inclusion Health podcast series. This is part of Inclusion Health Voices from the Margin webinar series. And I'm delighted to be joined by Carol Duffy. Carol is a child and adolescent psychotherapist and play therapist. Carol, when we met last week, we spoke about your role, and what struck me was how adaptable play is at any age, even for adults. Can you tell me a bit more about this?
Last 10 years or so, I have expanded my role to deliver a lot more training on the use of play. So I deliver training widely on play to other professionals in different roles to me, so not psychotherapists and settings. So what commonly happens is when people come into the room, they're waiting for their pen and their paper. But as you can see, I know everyone else can't, but on the table here today, I've brought a lot of play materials. And that's what catches people's eyes straight away. And what happens almost every single time is one, and usually it's a lot more than one, usually it's several adults, will pick up the play materials and say, "Oh, isn't this lovely? We should do more of this." And that is every time. And there's no coincidence in that, because there is no research to suggest that playfulness stops at a certain age. In fact, we as a species are intended to play. Our capacity and our drive to be playful, that often actually reduces because the time that's protected to be playful, or the importance of it, that reduces. So people play less, and it's a bit like a muscle. So the more you do it, the more you'll do it. And the less you do it, the less playful you'll feel. But there is a science behind that. It's not just something frivolous or a nice idea or a reward at the end of really hard work. We're actually intended to be playful. So there was a neuroscientist called Jack Panksepp, and he discovered 7 emotional systems in our brain circuitry. Okay, and these are built in the mid areas of your brain, so it's not accidental. They're there for a purpose. So when we play, we actually push ourselves to the outer edge of our abilities. So when we enter a situation in a playful way, and see, this is something that comes up a lot. People think, well, to be playful means I must have toys. Toys certainly help activate the play system. That's why I often have playful materials, because it invites people in straight away. But a playful way of being is a playful state of mind. It means you're open, you're curious, you're wondering, you move into situations in a more adaptive way. So that's why Jack Panksepp really tried to drive that point, that the capacity to play is our foremost source of joy. So the other circuitries we have would include, say, fear or panic or rage. And particularly in health settings, we meet a lot of people who are heavily impacted by those circuitry in their brain, understandably so. I'm not that long after surgery, and let me tell you, my fear system was very well activated.
Imagine.
But moving into it in a playful way means you're more likely to draw in a social engagement system, which means you're more likely to find the presence of the other tolerable and possibly even helpful and supportive. Does that make sense? You know, in that they feel more accessible to us. And that in itself helps us cope more. But the playful position, it can also activate more positive emotions, so a more positive state of mind. And that opens up your repertoire, your capacity to think, to imagine another way, to be more adaptive, to cope, to problem solve. It becomes far more possible to you when you have a playful state activated in your mind. So play is definitely not just for children. It shouldn't be.
Sounds like fun. Yeah. How do adults play? So how would you suggest we go about playing?
Well, that's such a broad answer, because our big question, it's very difficult to pinpoint it into do this and then you're playful. So there's a lot of research on what play looks like. So it's very hard to actually define play. And the more you research it, the more difficult it actually is to define it, because it is so broad and it's also really, really unique and individualized. So what's playful for you might be really not fun for me. So that's key to remember. It's individualized. But one of the things I do talk a lot about when I train on play, what I've whittled down, is that being playful involves 3 S's. So you need to be spontaneous, you got to let loose a little bit. There needs to be a little bit of silliness. So you got to be prepared to be a bit silly, and a sense of humour. So joy, fun, pleasure, they all are part of a playful state. So how do we invite playfulness? How do we activate the play system in another? Well, one of the most active agents you have, say for us as healthcare professionals, is ourselves. And communicating that we are playful, you're more likely to activate a play system in another. So one of the ways we do that is our facial expressions. And we tend not to think about that very much. We tend to think about what we're actually trying to do in our roles. So I have to tell you this, I need you to understand this, or I need you to fill out this form, or I need you to turn up on time, or whatever it is. That's our agenda. And we don't think that much about what the furrow of our brow looks like, or what our eye contact looks like, or what our facial muscles are communicating. And in fact, that's communicating way more, very quickly, than what we imagine. So a soft facial gaze, a soft, really thinking about your facial muscles. Now this can be a challenge when people want a very complex answer, but it does boil down to that simplicity, thinking about your facial muscles, particularly when we are working with people who might be more compelled to feel frightened in contact with us or resistant to us. So our concerned face, our serious face, our important face, that can actually communicate danger quite quickly. There's something called neuroception. A man called Stephen Porges coined that term. And it's something that happens faster than perception. So very quickly, I'll be looking at your face. So say, for example, just to put you under the spotlight, you're looking at me now. Once I started talking about Stephen Porges and neuroscience, your brow furrowed. Okay, this is a good thing. It's a live example. And you became very serious in how you looked at me. Now that's fine. I'm okay with that. But if I'm someone who has a trauma history, I might see that as a sudden change in your presence. And now you're got quite frightening to me. Do you see? Our serious tones of voice does the same thing. So we communicate safety and playfulness using our tone of voice and our facial expressions. So one of the easiest ways you can activate play system is thinking about how you sound or how you look to somebody else. And we don't do that a lot. But I can tell you that the people we meet are looking at us.
They have the time.
Well, it's happening rapid fire. Like we actually scan for danger, I think, is it 4 times a second. So if you have neuroception, you know the expression looking at the world through rose-tinted glasses. So if they're looking through a lens of neuroception where their history has been an accumulation of ruptures or uneasy contact with other people, their neuroception is going to much quicker assume that the furrow in your brow or your concerned face or your worried voice, which you might be intending to communicate as care, and I'm really interested in you, they could miscue that and see it as danger. So they'll do it really quickly, quicker than you can imagine. So it can be really helpful for us to communicate safety and playfulness, thinking about our tone of voice. And a lot of people start wondering, well, how do I just automatically change my tone of voice? So a quick way that I demonstrate this on training, but there's nothing to stop us doing this at any point. You just have to choose the right moment. Or it could be just that you're telling someone, this is an interesting way to change your voice, and it communicates playfulness very quickly, is a voice changer.
So, what happens if I start talking like this? There's an immediate change in your nervous system, which means, believe it or not, I've just activated your play system. So, bear with me while I continue to activate it. So right now you're smiling, your facial expression has dramatically changed, and we are now
in a very playful position together. So it's as quick and easy as that. So it changes the entire dynamic of the interaction. So the funny thing is, and I always share this, when I give my youngest daughter this microphone and she uses this setting, she sounds like me.
That's great fun. I love it.
Lots of laughter.
Lots of laughter. I'm trying to decipher what the voices sound like. Do you know, on cartoons and stuff, I was trying to picture where they're coming from.
Chipmunks usually is what people think, or sometimes DuckTales. But what happens, it doesn't actually need to even be thought about. What's happened there between you and I right now, which isn't pretend, which isn't made up, which isn't me teaching you about a play system, we've actually shared a moment of joy together. We'll always remember that. You'll always remember that.
I definitely will. Yeah.
And I'll always remember that. I'll sit back someday and go, did you really bring a toy microphone into a podcast? And the answer will be yes. And the shared experience we have actually propels our relationship. That shared joy. We've had little boosts of oxytocin happen right now in our brains, which promotes bonding. So I'm going to like you a bit more because you laughed with me the next time and not at me, which could have also happened. And you might like me a little more. You don't have to answer that.
Oh, I think you're great fun.
The next time. And so can you imagine in a situation where relationships feel frightening or threatening? And I'm not saying that each and every one of those you bring in a voice changer, because you could choose that in the wrong moment and it could feel patronizing. That's why play is very time dependent. It's very moment dependent and it's interaction dependent. But it's a good one to use at any time, even if you're just saying, this is what I mean. You know, sometimes people find people like me quite serious. And I always like to tell them I'm not as serious as you might think. And to prove that, I show them one of my favourite toys. That's just an example. But just having the materials out, as I said at the beginning, me bringing the materials here on the table, it automatically invites your play system to join. Do you see what I mean? And when you do that, it co-ops with other emotional circuitry like your seeking system, which is like, okay, I actually want to be here. I'm interested in this. And it calms down the fear or the rage or the panic systems that might be activating when we come into a more stress-inducing situation. So just by providing, I guess, proving in the very first point of contact that this can be playful. I wouldn't suggest to anyone to be announcing to someone when they come in the door, I'm very playful, because it's not genuine. Playfulness has to be genuine. Again, though, being playful yourself is one of the best ways you have of inviting playfulness in others of all ages.
Do you think that play therapy can help those who have gone through traumatic experiences to discuss what's happened to them?
I'm really glad you asked that question, actually. And again, it's a broad answer. So, firstly, I think play is really supportive and conducive to positive mental health for anyone, regardless of what their underlying issues or concerns or history are. So, play as therapy, when working with complex issues like attachment or neglect or abuse, people with significant adverse childhood experiences or even in adulthood. Play therapy in the context of a mental health profession. So you introduced me as a child and adolescent psychotherapist. So I've done 4 years training to be a psychotherapist to work with those clinical issues. So what I would say then is that play therapy as part of an intervention that a mental health professional uses is a very useful intervention. And using play or creative arts at any age can be helpful. And it can be really restorative. It can really support the individual reorganise what they've actually been reenacting in their life. And usually what they're reenacting is behavioural memories, procedural memories like symptoms that are reenactments of the original trauma, or stuck parts, incomplete trauma recovery cycles. So I'm defending myself against a relationship that might harm me, even though this particular relationship hasn't harmed me, but my nervous system is reacting or reenacting my body's defense mechanisms in this contact now. And it feels really real now. Okay? But it brings 2 other things in response to that. It's not intended to bring forth discussion because it's the body that's trying to reorganize. So play speaks the body's language, and through play, you can support an individual's of any age capacity to reorganize their nervous system's visceral response to something that reminds them of the trauma. And the something that might remind them of the trauma could be everything. It's smells, it's sights, it's proximity, and one of the biggest triggers is often ourselves, other people, services that they don't trust, that they believe have let them down. So when the nervous system has been able to reorganize, and that has to be viscerally felt in the body, which is why play or creative arts are such powerful mediums. When the play is reorganized in the nervous system, not the play, the trauma, the play helps the reorganizing, insight can then come. You might be more likely to have a discussion then, but the work has actually happened. Do you see what I mean? So the discussion, and that's where we often trip ourselves up in the West. We feel like we need to go straight away. Well, I'm sure it's broader than the West, but we feel we need to go straight to the cognitive part, the thinking, the talking. But that comes after. I can't talk you out of your nervous system's responses. But by sharing a playful encounter like we did there, I can diffuse some of your nervous system's activation. And little micro moments of that, repeated and patterned over time, can literally shift a nervous system's experience and then expectations of future encounters. So the world becomes more manageable. That's why play overlaps so well with coping and pushing us to the outer edges of our capacities. It also broadens and builds. There's a woman called Barbara Fredrickson who studied positive psychology and positive emotions. And she's developed a concept called the broaden and build theory, where she looks at the positive emotions that are released when we play. Like I said earlier, it boosts oxytocin and relationships, but it also expands our repertoire for problem solving. So we become more able. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
There's one other thing I want to say in relation to that, something that I feel really strongly about when it comes to therapy. Now, I've specialised in working as a therapist with children. So a gate that I would hold and feel it's really important to hold is there can be a compulsion to send the child to therapy, to therapize them. And we responsibilise them then with the burden of what might be actually more related to their environment. Why do we expect the child to take on the therapeutic intervention if the environment they're living in isn't supported to allow that therapy to actualise? So when I work, I would spend a lot of time before the therapy starts at supporting felt safety and positive relational experiences in the child's lived world. Because 1 hour a week in a therapy room that's outdated. And there can be a big view that the child needs this therapy, this therapy, this therapy. Now, I am a therapist, I promote therapy. But in a holistic way, in a coherent way. Sometimes I say it's like and this is the same for adults. So you can resource in therapy, but for a child who might be going back out into an environment that's still difficult or not conducive to well-being, we have to ask ourselves about our expectations. Now, you can still offer therapeutic supports, of course you can, but we need to think wider. We need to think, how can we support the environment? How can we meet all areas of the environment, from their family home to their school, that's a big one, to their encounters in every area of their life? How can we intervene there? And it might be just micro moments, might be little shots of just advising that the environment matters. Then therapy actually is exponentially more powerful.
I'm getting the word safety from you a lot. Healthcare is a scary place if you're sick and you don't know what's the next step and what your diagnosis is going to be. I'm just wondering, is there any way that we as healthcare professionals who may only have that one visit with the person can make them feel safe? So you spoke about the communication element and the facial expression. Is there anything else in the room? I know you brought some playful objects there, and they're pretty simple ones actually, Carol. There's some cups for drinking cups, paper cups, and some toilet roll holders, which look very interesting. Maybe you could talk a little bit about those.
So the play materials I've brought to you today, one is a sock filled with chickpeas and drawn on with markers. 2 or 3 others are toilet roll holders. So I have a maraca with 2 balloons, keeping chickpeas in place. So this is my little maraca here. So that's literally a toilet roll holder with 2 balloons wrapping the either end, and there's rice or chickpeas inside. You can also pull on the balloon at the end, making a little drum beat, and that can create rhythm. And then this little cannon So I'll just show you this little crepe paper inside. So I have the bottom of the balloon tied and fixed to it. And you can talk. So say, for example, you're talking to a child and their family. And I know you might have a lot of big feelings when you come into this room and they might be ready to burst out like this. So you pull down and out pops the crepe paper. And as you can see, it hasn't all come out. You might see some might be still a bit stuck. They might need a little help from me. And you know what we know? We know that being playful together can really help with that. So I have some of these materials here. Some simple things like Play-Doh. Simple things, just the colour. I was at a conference a few weeks ago and I was setting up on stage and I was full of nerves, as always, everyone is. And I had balloons and little like Chinese finger traps and toilet roll holders and Play-Doh, my usual bits and bobs beside me. And the man who was filming, so he wasn't a speaker or an organiser of the concert or the conference, felt like a concert. He came up and he says, I'm so attracted to the colour. You see, the colour, it speaks to the right brain. So it's a non-verbal emotional transaction. And that's the language of attachment. And that's the language of relationships. It activates a play system, which means we feel safer. So having some very simple, easily accessible play materials can be just visible in your room. Colours on your wall. Just even like a cushion, a nice cushion, an emoji cushion, something simple can communicate safety at the get-go and playfulness. I prefer materials like the toilet roll holders or lollipop sticks or Play-Doh or toothpicks, plastic cups, because they're much more accessible to the majority of people. Most people will have access to an empty toilet roll holder at some stage. I have to stop myself from stealing them from hotels when I go in there because I use them so much. You can make puppets out of them, cannons, drums, emoji faces. You know, they're Russian dolls where you pop them in and out the layers. You can use it in that way. There are so many different ways that they can be used. And if you're engaging in a challenging conversation or just having them available, the nervous system will compel yours and the other's body to reach out and use them. Or even conversely, if you see a complete frozen response to the materials, it gives you an indicator that this is so scary, that their play system is so hijacked, their body can't reach out and touch. Because you'll find even the people who say they're not playful at all, do you see the little roller ring I have on my finger? That would be a very common one that people would reach out and pull because it's silent and it just goes up and down their fingers so they don't feel like anyone's looking at me being goofy. Do you see? But if you see someone in contact and they can't reach out to any of that, it's giving you an indication that their body is not feeling safe. And we have to think more about what do they understand? Can they understand anything that I'm saying? Because their body is so impacted by fear or whatever else is going on. So even if it's that you only have that moment in time to communicate safety, you might also be using that moment in time to assess they're really not safe. They're really not safe in their body right here, right now. What can I do? You know, we talk about inclusion. Well, it's not inclusive if we have a hypothesis that I'm not sure, did you hear any of that? I'm not sure did any of that go in because it looked to me like your nervous system was really hijacked. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah. Earlier on you mentioned about curiosity. Mm-hmm. Do you think as we get older our curiosity wanes?
It can. It doesn't have to though.
Okay.
Again, it's a byproduct of not being very playful. The more playful you are, the more curious you will be. So a play system is a curious system. And I think that's one of the best skills we can bring into our contact with people. I heard someone describe recently, like when a baby is upset, we never become, well, you can become impatient, but more often than not, you're going to be curious around, I wonder what it is. And your curiosity is driven by, if I find out what it is, I'll help the crying subside and we'll both feel better. But there seems to come a point where we stop being curious and we operate more out of expectations. And that's for us all. That's me too. I've done that when I'm overtired. I have more expectations than curiosity, especially with my own children. You come home after a long day, you're less curious and you're more, I expect. So when we find we're operating from expectations and not curiosity, that might be a self-check moment where we go, can I bring more curiosity into this? Because that will also activate your playfulness. And remember, playfulness is a state of mind. It can be aided by the use of materials, but it really is a state of mind.
It's very interesting, Carol. Is there anything that you would like to give a key message to any healthcare professionals listening today in relation to play therapy, play?
Oh, well, there's lots, so I'll try and funnel it down. How many podcasts have you got going? That's a joke. One of the things, and then this is something I've been driving for years, is that not just me, the majority of psychotherapists who use play, they'll talk about see play not as the means of the intervention. See it as the intervention. We need to protect space to be playful. We need to protect the time that's needed. You know, you asked the question, and I get asked that a lot. How can we do this if we've only a very short window of time? So yes, there's ways we can do it like I've described, but another thing we should be doing is pushing back and protecting the importance of time. The importance of time to relate and to be playful and to communicate that effectively. We can't be playful if we're panicking about the time ourselves. So that's a message I would like to give to all healthcare workers. Let's hold the time, protect it. It's as necessary as anything else. It is as important as the interventions because it does aid everyone's capacity to cope and to thrive.
To take the time.
Take the time, protect the time.
So protecting your time is important, but how can time be used more efficiently? I'm thinking of the nurse in ED who is so busy, they just do not have the time to be playful.
Again, a really important point. So playfulness can actually be activated in a micro moment. So when I deliver training on play, I never talk about big elongated periods of time. If you can get them, great. When I was talking about protecting time, I do think that is really important for us as frontline workers to dedicate respect and the potential for protecting and stretching that more and more. That said, I'm completely aware that there are places where people work, like what you described there, where it's emergency. There isn't the time. So you can be playful like that, using your tone of voice, using your facial expression. So think back to the example of a baby frantic. Okay, you've got a frantic baby. So what we would not do in that situation is say, your bottle is coming. You see, what we would usually do, even though we're being frantic, because we know what you actually need is physical regulation here. So all the nice emotional responses and let's be playful in this moment isn't going to soothe the hungry tummy. But you can communicate via your eyes, your facial expression, your facial muscles, and your tone of voice very quickly. I see you. I know. Your tone of voice, even if it isn't words you use, it's just holding eye contact. You're communicating in a micro moment. I've got you. I see you. I know you're going through something hard now, but you're not alone. And just that micro moment of contact can soothe. There's certain things we can't undo or stop happening in the moment that it's happening that are frightening or painful or very uncomfortable. So there's a lot of positions and roles that people hold that they're being with people in an extremely difficult situation that in and itself is traumatic. But you can soothe slightly by your tone of voice, just by giving them that little fragment of yourself. I know this is hard. I know. It doesn't even have to be your words. It's your tone, your eye contact. And that can be done in a micro moment. And it might feel ineffective. It might feel like it's pointless. But I'm telling you it's not. Because those are the things that are remembered. Those are the things that actually impact that trauma as it finds a home, shall we say, in the nervous system. I don't know if you've heard of Bruce Perry. Oh. Bruce Perry is a very famous neuroscientist. He wrote a book recently, well, not that recently, but in the last number of years with Oprah Winfrey, and it's about what happened to you. But one of the questions he always asks is, what happened to you and who was there? So you can be in that micro moment, the person who was there, that lessens the impact of that trauma. They were with me. I felt safe because they, it's almost like the air hostess. When you feel turbulence on the plane, you look at the air hostess. If they're calm, I'm calm. Okay? So looking at the face, the eyes, and listening to the tone of voice of the other can make a dramatic difference to your experience. I had surgery recently and I was a big wuss. And when I got down to get up on the table, like the child in me just went, I think I'm going to cry. And the nurse turned and said to me, you can if you want. And that's all he did. He didn't, I was still petrified, but that I can remember that. That's what has stayed with me. You can if you want. I remember saying, would you just hold my hand? And they held my hand. I still had to get the injection. I still had to have the operation. They couldn't undo that. And they still had to do it in the time frame that they had to do it in. It didn't slow things down. It didn't change their schedule. But it changed the experience for me.
That's really, really lovely story. Carol, it's been an absolute pleasure. I have learned a lot from you, both behind the psychology, the theory behind it, but also about how important play is and how we can weave it through our daily practice as healthcare professionals and use our time wisely. So thank you.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Today's episode was produced by Miss Annette Cuddy, Director, and Miss Mairéad Loftus, Specialist Coordinator, Nurse Tutor, both from the Centre for Nursing and Midwifery Education, Mayo, Roscommon. Thanks also to Mr. Alan Meaney, Radio Producer, and I'm Cora Appelbe, Specialist Coordinator, Nurse Tutor for the Centre for Nursing and Midwifery Education, Mayo, Roscommon. Looking forward to welcoming you to episode 3. You can follow us on X at CNME Mayo Ross. Stay tuned.